The cold wind whipped across the barren fields, tugging at the threadbare shawl Delia Darby clutched around her slender shoulders. At 20 summers, she had already known a lifetime of sorrow. The plague that swept through their village 3 seasons past had claimed both her husband and her parents, leaving her alone to care for her 5-year-old son, Thomas, in a world that showed little mercy to widows without means. Her golden hair, once her pride, now hung in limp strands around her heart-shaped face. Despite the hardship etched in the premature lines around her deep blue eyes, her beauty remained undimmed, a cruel blessing that brought unwanted attention from the village men and jealousy from their wives. Her once fine dress, now patched countless times, clung to her slender figure, the neckline frayed and lower than propriety might suggest, though she had no coins to spare for new cloth. "Mistress Darby," called the village magistrate, his voice carrying across the muddy square. "A moment of your time." Delia approached cautiously, Thomas hiding behind her skirts. Since her husband's death, every summons had brought fresh troubles, demands for taxes she could not pay, accusations of debts she did not owe. "You have received correspondence," the magistrate said, extending a sealed parchment with evident surprise. "From London." Delia stared at the document, her fingers trembling as she accepted it. Who in London would write to a peasant woman from Hollowbrook? Breaking the seal beneath the magistrate's curious gaze, she struggled to decipher the elaborate script. Her mother had taught her letters, uncommon for a peasant girl, but the formal language confused her. "It seems," she said slowly, "that I have an uncle or had one, Gilbert Darby. He has died and left me his property in Wisteria Vale." "Old Gilbert," the magistrate's eyebrows rose. "The hermit, that decrepit cottage has been abandoned for years. They say it is cursed." "It is mine now," Delia said, straightening her back. A cottage, however decrepit, meant walls to keep out the winter. It meant a chance. 3 days later, with their meager possessions bundled on her back and Thomas trudging beside her, Delia crested the hill overlooking Wisteria Vale. The valley below was choked with mist, the late autumn sun unable to burn through the gloom. In the distance, she could make out the dark shape of a cottage, half hidden among overgrown trees. "Is that our new home, Mother?" Thomas asked, his small face pinched with cold. "Yes, my love," she answered, though her heart sank at the sight. "Our new beginning." As they drew closer, the reality of her inheritance became painfully clear. The cottage stood, but barely. The thatched roof had collapsed in places, and ivy crawled through the windows like grasping fingers. The surrounding land was a tangle of weeds and thorns, nothing like the fertile fields she had hoped for. A sudden movement caught her eye, and Delia gasped as a large black dog emerged from the undergrowth, its yellow eyes fixed on them. She pulled Thomas behind her, but the dog merely sat, watching them with an unnerving intelligence. "Hello there," she said softly, extending her hand. The dog approached cautiously, sniffed her fingers, then pressed its head against her palm. "Look, Mother, he likes you," Thomas exclaimed, his fear forgotten. "He must have belonged to my uncle," Delia mused, noticing the worn leather collar around the animal's neck. A small tag hung from it, inscribed with the name Valor. "Valor," she repeated, and the dog's ears perked up. "Well, it seems we have all inherited each other." The cottage interior was no better than its exterior. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of damp and decay. Yet beneath the grime, Delia could see that the structure remained sound. The stone walls were thick, the hearth large, and surprisingly, much of the furniture remained intact. "We shall clean it," she declared to Thomas, who stared wide-eyed at the cobwebs festooning the ceiling. "And it shall be ours." For days they worked. Delia swept and scrubbed, repaired what she could, and burned the rest for warmth. Thomas, eager to help, cleared the smaller debris while Valor followed him everywhere, the two becoming fast friends. It was on the 3rd day that Thomas made his first discovery. "Mother, Mother, look what Valor found," he called, rushing into the cottage, his hands cupped around something. "What is it, Thomas?" she asked, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. He opened his palms to reveal a small, tarnished key. Valor was digging by the old tree stump. There were more, but he would not let me take them. Curious, Delia followed her son outside to where the dog stood guard over a small hole at the base of an ancient oak stump. Kneeling, she saw what had captured the animal's attention. A small iron box, its lid ajar, revealing several more keys within. "How strange," she murmured, lifting the box. It was surprisingly heavy, and as she tilted it, something shifted inside, something beyond the keys. Back in the cottage, Delia pried open the rusted box completely. Beneath the layer of keys lay a folded piece of parchment, the writing faded but still legible. "To whomever finds this, know that keys open more than doors. Look beyond what is seen to what is hidden. The garden holds the secret." "What garden?" Thomas asked, peering over her shoulder. Delia gazed out the window at the wild tangle of vegetation surrounding the cottage. "I do not know, my love, but perhaps we shall find out." The following days brought little progress. Though they tried each key in every lock within the cottage, none fit. Delia began to wonder if the message was merely the ramblings of her eccentric uncle, a cruel jest from beyond the grave. Yet Valor seemed determined to show them something. Each morning, the dog would sit by the rear door, whining until Thomas or Delia followed him into the overgrowth. He always led them to the same spot, a particularly dense thicket of brambles at what appeared to be the furthest edge of the property. "There is nothing here but thorns," Delia told the dog on the 5th day, her patience wearing thin as the brambles tore at her already ragged dress. "Come, Thomas, we have real work to do." But Thomas lingered, watching as Valor pawed at the ground beneath the thicket. "He wants to show us something, Mother. I am certain of it." Sighing, Delia knelt beside her son. "Very well, one more moment." Together, they pulled away some of the lower brambles, revealing what appeared to be stone beneath, not natural rock, but worked stone, like a path or wall. "What is this?" Delia wondered aloud, her curiosity piqued. With renewed purpose, she began to clear more of the brambles, ignoring the scratches on her arms and the tears in her clothing. By sunset, they had uncovered the top of a stone archway, half buried in soil and strangled by vegetation. An archway that led nowhere visible, or so it seemed. "We shall return tomorrow," Delia promised, noting Thomas's exhaustion. "With proper tools." That night, as Thomas slept and Valor lay watchful by the door, Delia examined the keys again by candlelight. One in particular caught her attention, larger than the others, with an intricate design on its head that resembled intertwined vines. The next morning, armed with a rusted shovel she had found in what remained of the shed, Delia returned to the archway. For hours she dug, clearing earth and cutting roots, until finally the full arch stood revealed, and beyond it the faint outline of a door so covered in ivy and moss that it blended perfectly with the surrounding growth. "Thomas, bring the keys," she called, her heart racing with anticipation. The large key slid into the lock as if made for it. With a grinding sound that spoke of years of disuse, the mechanism turned, and the door creaked open. Before them lay what must once have been a garden, but like no garden Delia had ever seen. Though now wild and overgrown, she could make out the shapes of formal beds, stone paths, and at its center, a fountain, dry and crumbling. Walls surrounded the space completely, explaining why they had not glimpsed it from outside. "A walled garden," Delia breathed. "A secret garden." "Look, Mother." Thomas pointed to where Valor was already racing ahead, his tail wagging furiously. The dog stopped at the fountain, barking insistently. As they approached, Delia saw that the fountain was more elaborate than she had first thought. Stone figures decorated its base, creatures of myth and legend, each carved with extraordinary detail despite the weathering of years. And at the very center, where water would once have flowed, stood the figure of a woman, her arms outstretched, her face turned toward the sky. Thomas circled the fountain, his eyes wide. "There are words here, Mother." Delia knelt to see where he pointed. Carved into the base of the fountain in flowing script were the words, What flows is more precious than water. What does it mean? Thomas asked. Before Delia could answer, Valor began to dig frantically at the base of the fountain, his paws scrabbling against the stone. Valor, stop! Delia called, but the dog continued until suddenly, with a grinding sound, a section of the stonework moved, revealing a small compartment within the fountain's base. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age but still intact. With trembling hands, Delia lifted it out, opened it, and found herself looking at a journal written in the same hand as the note from the box of keys. My dearest niece, the first page read, if you are reading this, then you have found what I hoped you would. I have watched you from afar all these years, unable to acknowledge you due to circumstances beyond my control. But I have always known that one day, this would be yours. Delia sank to the ground, the journal clutched to her chest. He knew me, she whispered. All this time he knew of me. Over the next days, between their work restoring the cottage, Delia read her uncle's journal from beginning to end. The tale it told was one of nobility, betrayal, and hidden wealth. Gilbert Darby, it seemed, had not always been a hermit. Once, he had been steward to the Earl of Highcrest, trusted with the family's most intimate secrets, including the fact that the Earl's younger brother had secretly married a common woman who bore him a daughter before both parents died of fever. That daughter was Delia's mother, making Delia herself the granddaughter of nobility. The Earl claimed all your mother's inheritance for himself, the journal explained. He sent her to be raised by peasants, denying her birthright. When I protested, he banished me from court. But not before I managed to secure some small portion of what was rightfully hers. The garden, Gilbert wrote, had been his life's work, not for its beauty, but for what it concealed. The fountain was merely the beginning. Follow the paths, the journal instructed. Where stone creatures guard, treasure lies beneath. With Thomas and Valor eagerly helping, Delia explored the garden more thoroughly. At key points along the paths, they discovered small statues of animals, a fox, a hare, an owl, and others, each marking a hidden compartment similar to the one in the fountain. And in each compartment, gold coins, jewels, documents of ownership to lands and properties throughout the country. A fortune hidden in plain sight, protected by weeds and rumors of curses. We are rich, Mother, Thomas exclaimed as they uncovered a cache of golden guineas beneath the stone hair. We are more than rich, Delia replied, reading one of the documents they had found. We are noble-born. And someone has stolen our birthright. Their peaceful exploration was interrupted the following morning by the arrival of visitors, 2 men on horseback, finely dressed and imperious in manner. Mistress Darby, the older of the 2 called, pounding on the cottage door. I am Lord Bramwell Osmond, steward to the Earl of Highcrest. We have business to discuss. Delia, who had been working in the garden, hurried back through the secret door, ensuring it was locked before approaching the front of the cottage. She had hidden the journal and the most incriminating documents beneath a loose floorboard in Thomas's room, but fear still clutched at her heart. My lord, she curtsied, conscious of her dirty hands and worn dress with its revealing neckline. She saw how his eyes lingered on the curve of her collarbone before rising to her face. How may I help you? The Earl has sent me to purchase this property, Lord Bramwell stated without preamble. He is willing to offer a generous sum, more than fair for such a modest holding. Delia's mind raced. Why would an earl want this seemingly worthless land unless he knew what it contained, or feared what might be discovered? I am afraid it is not for sale, my lord, she replied, keeping her voice steady. It is my home now. Lord Bramwell's companion, a younger man with cold eyes, stepped forward. The Earl of Highcrest does not make offers lightly, woman. You would be wise to accept his generosity. Valor growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Delia and the men. Thomas peeked out from behind the cottage door, his eyes wide with fear. As I said, Delia repeated, drawing herself up to her full height, it is not for sale, at any price. Lord Bramwell's expression hardened. Very well, but consider carefully Mistress Darby. These lands have a way of bringing misfortune to those who cling to them too tightly. The Earl merely wished to spare you such a fate." With that thinly veiled threat, the men mounted their horses and rode away. But Delia knew they would return. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Delia read deeper into her uncle's journal, searching for answers. The later entries grew increasingly paranoid, speaking of being watched, of fearing for his life. "The Earl suspects I have hidden the proof of his treachery," one passage read, "but he will never find it where I have placed it. The heart of the garden holds the truth, but only innocence can unlock it." "Innocence," Delia murmured, stroking Valor's head as the dog lay beside her. "What does that mean?" The answer came unexpectedly the next day. Thomas, playing in the garden while Delia cleared more of the overgrowth, had climbed onto the base of the fountain, reaching up toward the stone woman at its center. "Mother, look, she has a necklace," he called. Delia looked up to see her son pointing at the statue's neck, where indeed a faint line suggested a carved pendant. But as Thomas touched it, something extraordinary happened. The stone beneath his small fingers seemed to shift. "Thomas, wait," Delia called, but it was too late. With a child's innocent strength, Thomas had pushed against the pendant, and with a grinding sound, the entire statue began to rotate on its base. Beneath where the statue had stood was a cylindrical hollow, and within it, a metal tube, sealed against the elements. Delia's hands shook as she removed it and unscrewed the cap. Inside was a rolled parchment, and tied around it, a ring bearing a crest that matched the one on Lord Bramwell's cloak, the crest of the Highcrest family. The parchment contained a marriage certificate and a birth record, proof of Delia's mother's legitimate birth and her claim to the Highcrest name and fortune. But more damning still was a letter, written in the current Earl's own hand, ordering the death of his brother and his common-born wife to prevent any claim on the family title. "Murder," Delia whispered, horrified. "He murdered my grandparents." The sound of horses approaching interrupted her shocked contemplation. Through the garden walls, she could hear men's voices, more than two this time. "Thomas, to me," she called urgently. "We must hide." But where? The cottage offered no sanctuary, not against determined men. The garden had only one entrance that they knew of, and the men would surely search it once they broke down the cottage door. It was Valor who showed them salvation. The dog ran to a section of the garden wall nearly hidden by a massive tangle of roses. Barking once, he began to dig at its base, revealing what appeared to be a small drainage tunnel, just large enough for a woman and child to crawl through. "Quickly, Thomas," Delia urged, helping her son into the opening. With the precious documents tucked into her bodice, she followed, Valor squeezing in behind her. The tunnel was dark and cramped, smelling of earth and damp stone. They crawled for what seemed like eternity before emerging on the other side of the wall, in a dense copse of trees some distance from the cottage. Through the branches, they could see Lord Bramwell and at least 6 armed men surrounding their home. "We cannot go back," Delia whispered to Thomas. "Not yet." "Where will we go, Mother?" Thomas asked, his small face brave despite his fear. Delia looked down at the documents she carried, proof of her heritage, evidence of murder, and the key to their future. "To London," she said, determination hardening her voice. "To justice." The journey to London was arduous, particularly for a woman traveling alone with a young child and a dog. But Delia was no longer the desperate widow she had been just weeks before. The gold coins from the garden purchased decent clothing, secure lodgings along the way, and the respect that came with perceived prosperity. In London, she sought out not the courts or the king's men, but a particular solicitor named Edward Murray, mentioned in her uncle's journal as the one honest man I know in the city. Murray, a grave man with kind eyes, listened to her tale with growing astonishment, examining the documents with careful hands. "These are genuine," he confirmed, looking up at Delia with new respect. "And they present an irrefutable claim. The Earl of Highcrest has much to answer for." "Will the law support us?" Delia asked. He is powerful and I am. You are Lady Delia Darby, rightful heiress to the Highcrest fortune, Murray interrupted firmly. And more importantly, you possess evidence of treason against the crown. Even an earl cannot escape such charges. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, testimonies, and increasingly desperate attempts by the earl to discredit Delia's claim. But the evidence was overwhelming, and when Lord Bramwell himself broke under questioning and confirmed the earl's orders to eliminate Delia and seize the property, the outcome was assured. The Earl of Highcrest was arrested for treason and murder. His lands and titles were forfeit, and by right of blood, passed to Delia as the only surviving legitimate heir of the family line. It does not seem real, Delia confessed to Murray on the day the final judgment was rendered. She stood at the window of her new London townhouse, watching Thomas play with valor in the small but immaculate garden below. Her simple but elegant gown of deep blue silk complemented her golden hair, now properly styled and adorned with a single pearl hairpin, a far cry from the desperate widow who had arrived in Wisteria Vale. It is very real, my lady, Murray assured her, though I suspect the transition will take some adjustment. Delia smiled, thinking of the secret garden that had changed everything. We will keep the cottage, she decided, as a reminder of where we came from, and of the uncle who protected our future from beyond the grave. A wise decision, Murray nodded. And what of Wisteria Vale itself? The estate is considerable. I have plans for it, Delia said, her expression softening. The village nearby suffers from poverty and neglect. We shall change that. No child should grow up as Thomas might have, or as my mother did, denied her birthright. In the spring following their ascension to nobility, Delia and Thomas returned to Wisteria Vale. The cottage had been repaired, the garden fully restored to its former glory, though the secret compartments remained, empty now but preserved as part of their history. Standing in the center of the garden, beside the fountain that now flowed with clear water, Delia watched as Thomas ran laughing along the paths, Valor at his heels. The dog was growing older, grayer around the muzzle, but his eyes remained as bright and loyal as the day they had first met. Thank you, she whispered, though whether to her uncle's spirit, to fate, or simply to the faithful dog who had led them to their fortune, she could not say. What she knew with certainty was that from tragedy had come triumph, from loss had come legacy, and from a garden choked with weeds had bloomed a future she could never have imagined, one where her son would grow up knowing both his worth and his responsibility to those less fortunate. The Earl's downfall had caused a sensation throughout the country, with many other families coming forward with similar tales of dispossession and treachery. Delia used her new position to champion their causes, becoming known as a force for justice in a society often indifferent to the plight of those without power or connections. And on quiet evenings, when the duties of her station allowed, she would still walk in the secret garden, remembering the woman she had been and marveling at the woman she had become, not just through the inheritance of wealth and title, but through the strength she had found within herself along the way. For the true treasure of Wisteria Vale had never been the gold or the jewels, or even the proof of her birthright. It had been the discovery of her own resilience, the knowledge that from even the most barren ground, new life could flourish, if one had the courage to dig beneath the surface and the patience to nurture what was found there. And that was a fortune no one could ever take away.